And now we're back live here in the studio with George Rask standing by, who is a pilot and has some new information for us. George.
We had an opportunity just a few moments ago, Pam, Brian Van Aken and I, to listen to a recording of the Air Traffic Control Center at San Francisco International Airport. So the control tower, which monitors all departure and approach aircraft before handing off the radio communications to San Francisco approach and departure control. And we actually heard the communications with Flight 214. Now, I don't know if we've been able to queue up that audio yet, and I'm not sure. Well, we could start to listen. I'm not sure if it's going to be near the time of the crash, but we can roll the audio. What's important to know is that there was the communication sounded completely normal. 214 received its clearance when it was on final approach. You can hear other traffic at the tower telling other aircraft to plan their departures and their arrivals, but there was no indication from Flight 214 that there was any problem until after the crash. Let's listen.
And a 214 Heavy San Francisco Tower, we clear left clear land.
314 214.
Skywest 5427, fly runway, and contact NorCal departures.
Go ahead and go to departure, Skywest 5427, good. Sorry, United 885.
United 85, sorry?
Yes, that is 885 at the end. We might need a few more minutes, just a heads up.
United 85, roger, hold shorter runway 28 left, let me know when you're ready.
Go to 3 left, United 85. San Francisco Tower, Sky 5452, corporate visual 28 right.
5452, San Francisco Tower, runway 28 right, clear land.
All right, so let's pause this tape where it is right now, this recording, and I'll tell you what you've heard so far. At the very beginning, we heard Asiana Flight 214, you are cleared to land on 28 left. So they are lined up on final, they're nearing the airport, they're all set up for their landing. Then we heard other communication with aircraft on approaching that are approaching the runway. They're being told to hold short. We heard another aircraft being cleared to land on the right. Now, as we listen to this tape, we'll hear again another report from 214 as they are once again cleared to land, and then we won't hear anything until you start to hear aircraft being vectored away. They're told to go around, divert to San Carlos, change frequencies, and you will hear the pilot from 214 request emergency assistance. Let's go ahead and roll.
San Francisco Tower, Skyhawk 737, go around. 1,500 feet over San Carlos.
Skywest 6389, maintain 3000.
280, 3000, Skywest 6389.
Now it's happened. You can hear it in the controller's voice. They've just instructed the first flight.
214 Heavy, emergency vehicles are responding.
214 Heavy, emergency vehicles are responding.
Emergency landing.
Okay, now it's,
Cessna 737 Zulu Delta, San Francisco Tower, remain clear of the San Francisco class for all airspace. Contact San Carlos Tower.
7 Zulu Delta, contacting San Carlos Tower and remain clear.
Helicopter 30 Foxtrot, leaving the broad airspace in 2 miles radar service, terminates block, maintain the appropriate change course. Port is closed, San Francisco Tower.
So there you heard them say the airport is closed.
Asiana 214 Heavy, San Francisco Tower.
Okay.
Are we hearing from the pilots there?
You heard, yes, you are hearing, what you're hearing in that communication are the pilots contacting the control tower. The control tower has control, dominion, authority over the airport. So as flights are approaching, they're talking to air traffic controllers. They're transferred to San Francisco approach control, they're within 20 to 50 miles of the airport. And then the very last thing that happens is they're handed handed off from approach control to the control tower. And that's the communications. Those are the communications to which we're listening right now. So what you're hearing is, what we heard is all the pilots that are on approach and departing. And we also heard the pilot of 214 call to say that he acknowledged he was cleared to land on the left. Then the next thing you hear from 214 is his request for emergency assistance. And this is presumably after the airplane has hit the ground and presumably come to rest. So it sounds as though his radio was still working after the impact.
Yeah, and he was able to say something. Does this suggest anything to you as a pilot, George?
Well, only that this was a complete surprise to the pilots, because we heard his communication when he was just seconds from landing. We heard him acknowledge the tower, that he was cleared to land on the left. There was nothing in his voice or in his communications leading up to it that indicated any kind of trouble. There was no communication from the aircraft with the control tower of any trouble. And this is what we've heard from other eyewitnesses, ear witnesses, that have reported that there was no indication of an emergency from the pilot before the actual incident.
And making it particularly frightening for those on board, because normally if there's an emergency issue, of course, all of the rules that we're told each time we get on the plane about how to handle a crash landing of any sort would have been applied.
They would have been in effect. There were no instructions to the crew, as we heard from one of the survivors of the crash that we've interviewed here on KRON4. We've replayed that audio, and we may do it again, I'm sure. But we heard him say there was no indication from the cabin, from the cockpit or the flight crew, of any hint of a problem, only that they all observed that it seemed as though they were too low. We heard him say it looked like we were going to hit the water. Then he heard the sound of the engines powering up. But when an aircraft is in landing configuration, when it's low to the ground, when its speeds are slow, even if the pilot applies full power, which it sounds like he did, there probably wasn't enough time for the airplane to gain airspeed and altitude.
Now, what are the other pilots of the other planes coming in? They're now getting this news as well. What's happening with them?
What they're doing is being vectored, directed away from SFO. They're being handed off to San Carlos Tower. That was one that we heard. It was a Cessna Skyhawk, I think, that was handed off. You're also hearing other traffic that was lined up either on the approach or ready to depart. You're hearing all those aircraft held because of the emergency condition that was then in effect.
So they're closing the airport, George, within seconds.
Absolutely, within seconds of the incident. And I'm sure we'll be hearing this audio again. And it's interesting because you can hear the change of voice on the part of the controller. Even though we don't hear any indication that the crash is coming, no one talks about, geez, it looks like something's going wrong out there. Nothing until after the impact, and you hear the controller respond to someone calling. You can hear the change, the sense of urgency in the voice, and then we hear the call from the pilot of Asiana Flight 214 as he requests emergency assistance. The call comes out 2, perhaps 3 times, and he is reassured by the flight controller that all emergency assistance is on its way.
We always hear about the black box, which is recording everything that's going on. Does it record the conversations as well as the indications of what's going on all of the instruments?
Yes, it does. The flight data recorder, or the black box, Pam, will record not only all voice communications, but it also records all instrument data. So it keeps track of altitude, airspeed, temperature, and other relevant factors like engine speeds, and it also monitors other engine gauges.
So, George, it has to be said, obviously we may not know for a long time exactly what went wrong, but they're going to have to look at the possibility of pilot error.
Well, that's always a possibility in any incident, so yes, that that will certainly play into the investigation. Again, one critical piece of information that we've gleaned from our eyewitness report, from the interview that we had with the survivor, was that he heard the sound of the engines powering up when it looked as though they were going to hit the water. He said it sounded like the airplane was taking off. So that sounds like full power. And as we've been able to learn from websites that track aircraft on approach, we can see that the aircraft was descending and then for a brief period of time started to climb. It started to establish what's called a positive rate of descent. It means the aircraft was gaining altitude briefly, but then the tail struck the ground, and that was the end.
All right, and